Welcome to Six Man. Why don't we get started? Take your seats. I'm Bob. This is Ole. I think you've seen us up here before. We'll get started. Go ahead. So here's the note well. You should note it well. Here's the administrivia, but we still need a minute taker.
We have George is taking minutes and Tim are doing the job describing.
Oh, excellent.
Thank you very much for that.
Excellent. Okay, yeah, it's missing. So here's the agenda. We're doing the introduction, agenda bashing. The next talk will be Suresh, our AD. Will talk about the status of the IETF last calls on these documents, and I think as well as the two that are being requested to advance in place. Tim will be talking about the BIS document of node requirements, Eric Klein, router advertisement prefix information, Fred, route information objects and redirect messages, and then 3 new individual drafts, denial of service signaling, IP address usage recommendations, and recommendations on temporary interface identifiers. Any other agenda requests? Okay, not hearing any.
Okay, so let's quickly go through the document status since IETF 97. We have published 4 RFCs. It's the atomic fragments, first up router selection, the recommendation on stable IP6 identifiers, and the updated version of the DNS options in RAs. We have one document in the editor queue, which is the obsolete MIBS document. We have these 3 documents at the ISG plus the ones we're elevating unchanged that Suresh will talk about very shortly. We have the Max RA document that I believe passed working group last call without comment. It would be great if we could get some volunteer reviewers for that document, and then we're going to advance that. Suresh?
Suresh Krishnan. So it did have comments, and there was a new version posted in response to the comments. So there was I think 3 people who commented on it.
Okay.
And who reviewed it, and there's a new version which actually supports has the comments resolved. And I think Lorenzo had still one open point. Maybe we can still discuss it.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, apologies for that. I got a bit distracted with these last call threads. We have 2 active working group documents: the RS refresh option document and the segment routing header document. Any comments on document status? No.
On the segment routing header, we made some changes lately. I still don't believe the document is ready for any last call for now, because we may introduce some other changes. So maybe expect some new updates in the coming months.
Okay, thank you, Stefano. So for our goals and milestones, we're just 2 years behind, so that shouldn't be. Well, I guess we're largely now done with the last bullet point, and I'm unsure if we're going to do any more on the issue IPv6 fragmentation. So from that perspective, I think we're very close to being done. So we'll see what we'll do with that during the next few months, I think. Okay, Suresh, do you want to give us a report from the IETF last calls?
Not particularly, but yes, thank you.
So, Suresh Krishnan, so I'm the responsible lady for this working group. And so I just want to summarize the IETF last calls that happened like about a month ago and try to like narrow down on like how we go about resolving them. So they're all like pretty contentious last calls, except for the ones that are elevated in place. So I'll just go through one at a time. Okay, so as you see up there, there's like 5 documents that try to move into internet standard. So 3 of them were like edited drafts. So there were like some changes that came from the previous versions. So that's the 2460, the 4291, and the 1981, the patent PD. So these 3 things actually had changes in them. And there's like 2 other drafts, the ICMP and the DNS extensions, like that were actually elevated in place. So there was like no errata or anything on them. So they were just getting elevated in place. So that's just a status change. And yeah, go ahead. Okay, so let's go them one at a time. So first one is the 2460 BIS, and there's like a lot of comments received. Like it's like a very animated discussion. So thank you very much to everybody for commenting on this, and it was like very constructive, even though like things got a bit heated. Like people are actually trying to make their points, and so one thing people are saying is like, okay, like I want to be able to insert headers in there, and that is fine. But the responses fell into like kind of 3 large groups. So one of them who said like doing this like was never allowed, right? 2460 is very clear that this is not allowed, and we don't need to add any more text like to do anything. So the second set of people said like, okay, 2460 was very clear that this shouldn't be done, but a lot of people are misunderstanding this and like trying to do some funny stuff. So let's make it clearer in this. And the third set of people said, we should allow header insertion, period. And we should explain how to do it. And so the first thing is, we cannot explicitly allow header insertion and describe it here. That's not in the scope of doing this for internet standard. Like I'm really open to somebody writing up how to do this in a safe way and bringing it to this group and actually trying to advance it as a document, updating 2460 BIS, whatever it becomes. So that's like really on the table. So no blocks here from me, okay? And the other 2 things like pretty much lead to, we just add some clarifying text because the intent is clear. So nobody has argued, maybe somebody will argue today, that 2460 was allowing header insertion, okay? People might have, maybe they can stretch the imagination to do that, but it's not that anybody claimed like, okay, 2460 allowed header insertion, we did it, so we need to do it. So I would like to hear if people think that, okay? And so I concluded there was consensus to add some clarifying text in this draft, which says like explicitly that header insertion deletion is not allowed on nodes that are not in the source address. So that's the conclusion I sent out to the list. It's kind of still being discussed, but that's what I'm going to go with unless I hear like why it's like catastrophically wrong. Okay. So anybody wants to take a shot at like talking about this? I want to do one document at a time. So like everybody should have a chance to talk. Brian?
Brian Carpenter, got to the microphone first. So I fully support your position, as you realize, but I also have the feeling that what people do in the privacy of their own networks is their business. And I think the door should be open to there's some way of defining a safe way of doing header insertion in a private domain. I think we should not be religious about this. We should be practical and realistic. So I actually have a text proposal composed about 2 minutes ago. In the introduction to 2460, it says, this document specifies the basic IPv6 header and the initially defined IPv6 extension headers and options, period. I propose to extend that sentence by adding the word and options required for interoperable communication between any 2 nodes on the internet, period.
But isn't
Now,
that
that may not appear to say anything, but it does actually say that the purpose of the document is internet-wide communication, which I think is the key point in why we have this tussle about extension headers.
But isn't that what we do here, Brian, for all the documents? Like this could be added to like pretty much
It's not stated in
80%
the
of the
definition.
documents that we do, right?
I just looked at the definition of an internet standard in RSC, some other number, and it does not state that.
So I think for IP, the most basic protocol of all, right, is actually a good idea to state that.
Okay.
I'll put that on the list anyway.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. I think Robert needs.
Yeah, Robert Rashuk. So I think looking at the list, and there's a clear agreement that insertion of the headers or deletion is okay. It was something questioned that as far as MTU, as far as internet, whatever internet means to people, but no one questioned that if I have my own data center or I'm using provider which the guarantee is 4K, it will be a bad thing, right? So based on this, clearly stated in the document now that this is impossible or forbidden, it's a bad thing. I mean, document was written 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I didn't know that my watch will be telling you ever today, right? So I don't think it's a good change.
Okay, so Robert, stay there. Like you don't have to just stay there. Okay, so I'm going to respond to you. So this is as Brian said. Okay, we are not the protocol police here. Okay, so we just explain how to do interoperable implementation. Whatever you do in your data center, there's nothing we can do, right? IETF cannot go after people and say like, okay, like, oh, let's check if it's up to people who do something in the data center. This is like for over the internet interoperability. Okay, so there is like clear stuff that has been brought up. For example, like undebuggable ICMP errors. Okay, so if you do this insertion, like a host gets a packet and he has no idea what to do with it. Somebody who does this in a private system needs to just explain. Like all I'm looking for, I think Stefano, like since he's standing at the mic, he's going to write something up which explains how to do this. And if that does it, that's going to be updating this 2460 document, and everybody is going to be happy. But that needs to come here. Okay, like I haven't seen this proposal. You say it's all going to work. I want to see how it works, because people can. I'm sure people can say like I can put like I can probably put in like a TCP option inside the hop by hop option header. Of course you can, right? There's nothing we can do about it. Like I don't want that to be the norm. Like the norm should be how things work on the internet. Like I'm perfectly fine with people writing up how things work in the private data center.
No, but even internet, as I said, I'm using ISP between US and Japan, and they guarantee 4K delivery. So it's perfectly fine for me to actually get the packet from A to B over the internet, what you say, right? And to your point, I think it's incorrect to, on one hand, ask Ayana
So
to
why can't you encap?
Sorry?
Why can't you encap? If you have 4K MTU, just encap. It's 40 bytes more.
Yes, you can.
No,
you can do
because that's the
open
point,
caps.
right? We never seen an argument against why encap doesn't work.
It's good.
Sorry,
Thanks.
but NCAP doesn't solve all the issues.
Stefano Previdi.
Stefano, Previdi system. So we always, and I've seen this on the mailing list, why not using NCAPs? We do use NCAP, and we do also do header insertion. It's really, I think, well explained in the draft that has been submitted a few days ago. So it's wrong to put NCAP in front or in place of header insertion. Now, I understand that IETF is supposed to standardize technology for internet, any node to any node connectivity. There are plenty of examples in IETF history of the standardization of technology that is not only used over the internet any to any, but also used in confined context, like controlled environments, controlled domains, and so on. And here we are exactly in the same situation. Now we are about to publish something that a document that we may have to amend in a few weeks. So since we are in the process of updating a document written 20 years ago, knowing that 20 years ago we had something in mind that may have changed in 20 years, let's take the opportunity to do the right thing now and put some words inside that says, okay, any to any over the internet do this, and if you are in a controlled environment, you may think differently. That's pretty much what we are asking.
Thanks, Stefano. So do you have documented examples
Yes.
of these things work in data center environment that you can write up as a draft and bring it here today? What?
Yes.
No, it's not. Okay, I read the draft. Like Stefano's draft, I read it, okay? This is the internet standard, okay? Like, we are not elevating this, like, if this is proposed standard, we can, like, take whatever.
Ago, a draft. Did you read that one?
I understand. 2460 base is internet standard, okay? So it's got a higher bar than I wrote a draft 2 days ago, right? We're talking about implementing of that, deployment of that, like figuring out what the issues are. It took us 20 years to go from like draft standard to proposed standard, to internet standard, right? In this case, right? I just don't see this Stefano. Okay, like you written something, like most of the people in this room probably haven't even read it, right? And you're saying like we are moving some document from draft standard to internet standard after 20 years, and we should go and change that. That is not the right way to do it, right?
No, but
I
I mean,
accept everything you say.
there is a
People can-
reality out there, and it would be a mistake from this working group to just ignore it and base the reasoning only on the idea you had in mind 20 years ago. That's my point.
It's not. This is what is implemented and deployed. Michael?
Stefano, stay there. You will be needed.
Okay,
I'm going to
Lorenzo,
put you
go.
on the spot.
Lorenzo, go.
So, Lorenzo Caliti, fortunately, I don't have a horse in this race at all. And so that allows me to say that I support your position 100%. Just because this is being elevated to full standard doesn't mean we can't change it tomorrow. Okay? Yep. So my question to you, Stefano, is what are you afraid of? Even if we publish this document, then we do something that makes sense, we design it carefully, we write it down, and then we standardize it, and then we're done. This is what we do all the time for every document. So my question to you is, what is this going to be? This is just a reflection of the text that was written 20 years ago. It is what implementations have been building since until yesterday, all right? So this is the state of the art. So, okay, we published the state of the art. We can change it. So what are you worried about? Like the
Well,
people is
first, I'm not afraid of anything.
okay, good, good.
The only thing is that I found really a pity to publish something that is going to be amended and updated just after a few weeks. So
That's fine.
that's it.
That's no. So okay. So somebody point me at the text that says a full internet standard. It has more value than a proposed standard because blah blah blah. I looked for that text. I couldn't find it.
Something that has been around, Ahmed Bashandi Cisco Systems, something has been around for 20 years. Can it wait another 3-4 weeks?
No.
Why?
Hold on. Like, no, unless, hold on,
What's the-
hold on. Like,
what's
I'll just say something, okay? Unless you plan to like write this, implement this, deploy this, and get 20 years of experience in 3 months.
Who said that that this is going to
If you didn't want, yes, I let you.
Okay, go ahead.
So my suggestion is, write down what you want to do. Let's standardize it. Let's evaluate that it's correct and it's safe. And if it's not safe for use on the internet, then we scope it. I mean, I don't understand what the fuss is about. Right? Let's just advance this document. This is what everyone else does except for your implementation. And then you write down what you want to do.
Okay, thanks, Lorenzo. Next is Michael. So I'm gonna read.
Michael Richardson.
Yeah.
So I really like Brian's proposed statement, and I think that's really an amendment to the beginning. And it I mean, at our second step, I think we've unfortunately some of our words wrong in not fixable, but so we have an internet standard. It doesn't just apply to the internet, right? But that's the word that we've picked for step 2, right? So that may be confusing some people somewhere about some things, but it's step 2, and it means that we have proven and shown interoperability. It does have a stronger statement because it includes that very clear bit that we've cut out the pieces, we've said the things that were wrong, were incorrect, and it does have a higher weight in things, and it does matter to some governments and procurement bodies and other places like that. That does matter. And I think that your point, and I don't think it's being, Lorenzo tried to say it, I don't think it was clear, that so we write a new document tomorrow and we publish it the week after, we still need 2 years of some testing out there, okay? And applicability may say, and it's useful in data centers, or it's useful in ISPs, or whatever it is, okay? But we should remember as well that we regularly write documents which are not about internet, capital I standards, but internet protocol standards.
Yep.
And we do a lot of that, and we have to remember that there's more than just the internet. There's also, all sorts of networks that are connected to it, and this is what we're talking about: people's private networks, and I think that's totally reasonable. So I applaud you for finding this way through this, and I think I support you very much, and I think Brian's half sentence is perfect. Thanks.
Just a quick comment. It seems like there is a push. Ahmed Bashandi, Cisco Systems, one more time. There is a push to do something very quickly, even though we know that there is something else that is coming that will impact it. And as Stefano said, it doesn't make sense to push something 20 years, 2 weeks earlier. just because we don't want to wait.
No, but what do you think will happen in those 2 weeks?
Just wait the 2 weeks. You waited 20 years.
No. What do you think is going to happen to change this?
2
decision?
days ago, a draft was sent out. Just take a look and you will figure it out.
No, I read the draft.
So,
Okay.
so
This is
just correct, I think what you said. We've been working on this for close to, I don't know, between 1 and 2 years. So it's
Right.
not just something that just happened.
Yeah, I understand. What I'm saying is that 2460 has been around, I don't know how long. Can wait another 2-3 weeks.
It will anyway. It's not on the telechat agenda. I think it will wait at least
Who are
a
you?
week or two. Mark Townsley. I think it will wait at least a week because it's not. When is it on the telechat agenda?
April 13th. So it's largely 2 more weeks, right? But
Yeah.
as I said, I really don't think this is going to be implemented, deployed,
Actually, you-
debugged. No, wait,
But-
like debug, like get like wide interval experience. Somebody writes up the things, fills all the bugs in 2 weeks.
But clearly, the floor is open for discussion. You did that earlier. Anyway, I want to let John have his.
Okay, go.
Yeah, so John Letty, Comcast. So, I've been asking, kind of dumb questions, just trying to understand the impact of the language and what this really means. So, and I'll try to summarize it. I'm trying to help you. But I think vendors can implement insertion. We're okay with that.
Correct.
And I think operators can implement the vendor domains.
Correct.
And so I think what it precludes is any working group or any standard being published considering insertion.
That's
Yeah,
not true either.
That's what I was.
That's not true either. That's so.
Unless
doesn't
it addresses
preclude-
2460 in the new language.
2460 goes through. If you write up
Right.
like how your thing is supposed to work, insertion.
But
in your
no other
domain.
working group, no other solution can use that insertion deletion
That's not true.
until this is addressed.
That's not true, right?
How
Because
does-
you can write a proposal, like Stefano and you write a proposal tomorrow, which explains how to do this insertion. Okay.
No, I'm saying like independently, not this working, not directly addressing. No other working group that may use it as a tool can do it, right?
Unless
Without
there's
addressing
like,
3%.
unless there's a draft that describes, it doesn't
To
have to go
address
through
this.
6 man, right? If
Right,
it
so-
goes through some other group which describes how this works and updates
So-
this document.
So all I'm saying is like the impact of this really is an internal IETF impact on the work scope. So like what they can address for solution space. And they can't do insertion and deletion of headers unless they address 2460 first. So I think that's the impact. And just on the 20 years, 2 weeks,
I'm saying no. I'm saying that's not true because like you can update 2460.
then
You
there's
don't have
no
to.
impact.
No. It doesn't have to be an update to 2460 to do it. There could be another document that describes this. This is not a 2460 base. It could be another document which could be like John's awesome protocol could update 2460 to do header insertion if it can satisfy all the concerns that have been made about header insertion.
New working group, John's protocol. So, but the other thing is the recommendation came out of the working group, right? And this new language change is really in the last few weeks. So, it's not like, we've had a change recently, right? I don't think, if I'm looking at the impact of the change and then not having the change. So by putting this language in, do we think we're going to, save the internet, from like some kind of, what is this 2 weeks or, a month delay by having this language in there, going to have as an impact? What are we looking for desired outcome?
Okay, so let me go back a bit on this, okay? So this document was discussed to death, especially this piece was discussed to death. The working group consensus was like, let's call it iffy, okay? So it's not like
The word's
working
rough.
group, what?
The word's rough, and rough is okay.
Like, yeah, okay. So it's more than rough, okay? So this is not like something that was like clear cut in the working group and it's getting changed in 2 weeks. This was always like floating around as like something. So this is like very contentious, like right from the beginning. So this is not something changed in 2 weeks. There's been like rough consensus is like good way to describe it. But I'm just saying this is not like something that just came out of the blue in the last 2 weeks. Okay.
Exactly. And this is an internet standard. And we went from kind of questionable, it's on the edge, we're not sure, for 20 years, all the way through working group last call. And this is a big deal, Suresh. When we hit IETF last call, you changed it, and it was your decision at that point.
It is, yes.
And you went from kind of iffy to very clear, shall not insert, shall not delete.
No.
That was a change just a few weeks ago that I think John was talking about.
No, okay. So I'll be clear again, Mark, because you're mischaracterizing what I did. Okay. The working group, there's nobody in the working group who said like, oh, this is allowed. So go back to the 672 message threads that
No, it was
Ulla was
to-
talking about.
Keep it ambiguous.
Why?
That was sort of the decision. Don't make it, not keep it
No,
ambiguous. Sorry.
this is clearly not
Sorry.
consensus that I
It was
see.
left ambiguous, should I say.
So,
No, it wasn't.
We added
Mark.
information.
Mark, so this is why we do IETF last call. The result of the IETF last call was different than what came out of the working group, as you said.
But was
But this is why we do IETF
I
last
agree.
calls. We got other people to look at it. And
But
Suresh
did you
is,
have other people
let me
look
finish.
at it?
Suresh's conclusion from that we should make it non-ambiguous. And that is a change, but it's why we did the IETF last call.
Well, I
It's
know
not, it's, so we're just
my understanding of an
relitigating
IETF
this
last
over and
call.
over isn't going to help.
An IETF last call is designed to get wider input, to make other working groups aware of a decision, not
And it-
to rehash the same discussion
And
and
it
make it
did,
change.
and it resulted in
No,
this
I
change.
don't think it did. I think it
Well,
had.
but that's the
by-
call of the AD. That's why we have this process.
By and large, the discussion on the IETF list mirrored the six-man list with the same people and the same discussions. I don't think we learned anything more. And we could probably run the statistics.
So
and
my
and
reading
show
is,
that.
if you looked at the comments from the people who are not active in six-man, who responded to the IETF call, and in some sense, we weren't expecting the working group participants to change. I think it was different. I also agree with other people. I support what Suresh concluded. That's what he's supposed to be doing, and that's the result of the last call.
So I'll ratchet back to the original statement I was going to make, which is I think an internet standard is a big deal. It should be a big deal. And it should reflect that which is very solid. I don't think this is very solid in the community, okay? Even if it was the original intent of the authors, which doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things.
So are you claiming, Mark, that
20 years of
insertion was
operation
allowed?
of extension headers? No,
Yes.
no. 20 years of maybe some implementations here and there that never really got off the ground. We are just getting into serious. No, extension headers. Do you support extension headers in your host?
Of course I do. It
Well,
was
for what?
Like 20 years ago.
Yeah. But you deploy it? Do you use it?
No, operators drop them, but
So, I mean, and there, my point is that we're just getting into the sort of, of course, I was there right with you, Lorenzo. We did the V6 deployment. Now we're in the, what can we do with it phase, okay? And to write into the internet standard something now, while at exactly the same time, we hear from the leading operators that did the V6 deployment, wait a second, I think I might want to do this insert and delete thing. And not just within my controlled domain. I might start there, but it needs to be designed to work on the internet. Why? Well, as we have heard from others, this stuff is coming, and already has been. And before the IETF last call that changed that text, maybe we didn't need to yet, right? But now, oh my God. No.
you can't process an extension header. You tell me how you can insert it without processing
It was.
No, it really said you can't process it.
Mark, it was
It was
not.
It was very clear.
Stefano, was it very clear?
And that's why we're fixing it. If it wasn't clear, that's why we're removing the
It's not,
ambiguity.
no, it was
Okay?
like, well, of course we can do this. Moving right along.
I think it requires like very creative reduction to do that. Okay.
And this is it. So this is all of this is telling me that when the document goes out, it says that this is the internet standard, that we'll have, I'm hearing, just write it up. It'll be easy to update that document. I don't have a whole lot of confidence that we won't hear, no, you can't do that because it's an internet standard. And your little draft that your little thing that you want to do right now can't update an internet standard.
That's a bad
right?
argument, Mark, because if it's draft standard, people are still going to say that. So that is a bad argument because like if I just abandon this right today, and I have 2460, the same people who are going to tell you like you can't do this are going to come and tell you you can't do this. So like that's not really no difference in there. So do you claim otherwise? Are people going to be put off by saying, oh shit, it's only a draft standard telling me not to do it, so let's go ahead and do it? No way. You're going to get the same set of people who are going to stand up in a mic line when you do this with draft standard as with internet standard. Okay, our goal as internet standard is to remove ambiguities we know about, and that's what we're doing here. So, and this is my call, and I'm overriding like whatever, like the people who are on the off, and that's perfectly fine, right, for me. So if you don't like it, there's like an appeal process for you to go through, but that's where I'm sitting at right now. So I seem clear consensus, but it's really open to appeal, right? Like if somebody says like Suresh didn't read the consensus correctly.
When you made that post to the list, you said, please send comments.
Correct.
Not, this is it, and if you don't like it, there's an appeal process.
Correct.
So
So
that's
like
not what you said.
No. I'm hearing comments, and I'm not hearing anything to change my view of what the So if somebody tells me like why this is wrong, that's what I want to hear, right? It's not somebody telling me like, why I should have done something differently. Somebody tells me like, oh, I have this headline session.
Okay, I'll step away.
Mark,
No,
I think we need to move
I'm
down the
about to
microphone
step
line,
down.
please.
I'm going to, the last thing. The reason why I think it's important from a transition and operational standpoint, I posted to the list today.
Okay,
Tim,
So take a look.
okay, thanks. Okay, Tim.
Tim Jones, so I see the same consensus that Suresh and Bob have described. I think what they propose is good. I also like Brian's extra little half sentence on the end. I think that's a useful thing to do, and that actually is part of opening the door then to allowing another document, which we've got a very early draft of, to clarify very clearly, A, why we're not doing encapsulation method vanilla, B, how to do that safely. If they're doing it already, they're basically describing what they're doing already, which is fine by me. But I don't think that's going to go through in 2 weeks or a month. It's probably going to take a year or so. So
Yeah, I think it's
my view would be to publish as you described, 2460 bis with Brian's extra line, and then allow people to come to the working group and work through this updated document. And I think I would also say it's quite likely, if you're worried about casting this in stone, that's the wrong thing to do when we know there'll be a change. There'll be another change after this, whatever it is. We don't know what it is necessarily yet, but another year or 2 years, someone will come and say, well, I want to update it to do this.
Right.
So worrying about casting it in stone, I don't think is an issue in itself.
Right, and I said this before, but it bears repeating. I'm not going to use some text in here to block some proposal coming in the future, okay? If the proposal is going to get blocked, it's because of something inherent in that. If somebody tells you like, okay, something is going to break because of this proposal, it's going to be based on that, not based on something's in 2460. We write stuff that gets updated all the time. We have a 2460 bis because people found issues and like they updated stuff. That's why we are here. So I find that argument not productive. Lorenzo?
Yeah, Lorenzo Caligi. So I think your earlier point was good. So yes, we have ways of doing. We have useful things that rely on header insertion, and those are great, and we should work on them, right? And I think nobody disputes that. What we're saying here is basically the baseline for the entire internet, and the bar has to be higher than I've got this stuff done. I started doing this stuff 2 years ago. I mean, SR is relatively new compared to IPv6, right? I think what we're saying here is this is the baseline for the internet, and we're basically clarifying the specs, and it doesn't mean that we can't do SR tomorrow, as long as we're careful to ensure that we address the basic interoperability issues. It's a lot easier to do SR in a controlled domain and evaluate it carefully and say, okay, these are the risks, and here's how we address them, as opposed to saying, well, we're going to leave the door open to like extension headers in general, and then we might end up with something that breaks in a way that we didn't anticipate. And like I said, like really, what is the concern with this text? Even if we write this down, we can do SR in the same way as we could without it, right? And like, please don't tell me that the original text is ambiguous, because somebody needs to explain to me how you can insert an extension header without processing it. I'm sorry, that position's untenable, right? If you're saying that new stuff has come around, that's great. It's true, new stuff has come around. Let's write it up. Let's do it carefully. Let's look at all the issues. Let's address them, and let's publish it.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks. I think John was next, and then Christian.
Hi, Suresh. John Wojciechowski, Comcast. So just a quick clarifying question for you. Right? So I'm not going to argue with Lorenzo. A few meetings ago, I can't remember which one, it was either Sol or whatever last summer was. I I seem to recall that there's some pretty equal division around where people solve.
Correct.
Okay. The question I have for you, and this is directed specifically, right, is you come along as the responsible AD and you've overridden, to use your words. I'd like to understand using what information.
Okay. So if you look at the working group like responses, so I've gone through the thread again, right? So there's nobody who claimed that the original intent of 2460 was to allow header insertion. Okay. So if you go through, I've gone through the whole thread. So given that, right, clarifying text is not going to hurt any existing implementation. Given that, like, nobody ever claimed that I could read that. So this is like the same reasoning at Lorenzo. So this is just clarifying text for the intent that was always there. Okay. And the working group consensus, as you say, was like very, very iffy. But if you actually look at the survey that Ula and Bob did, you can actually clearly see that people are fine with adding the text, even though this was like ranked differently. Like there was like no real, there was like really nobody claiming that it was allowed to do insertion before. Okay, so
Was that the survey that we all got?
Yeah.
Same survey? Yeah, okay.
yeah, okay. So and so looking at it, the consensus in the IETF last call was that adding this text is not going to break anything. So that's what consensus is, right? It's not like, I'm looking to the majority of the opinions or whatever. So I'm just trying to make something that is technically correct. Okay, that's how I see the consensus happening. So what I'm really listening for is like somebody coming to me and say, okay, this is why you read the consensus wrong. Doing this breaks something that exists and it's not ready to go to internet standard. That's really what I'm looking for. So if somebody can give me like some existence proof of things that were sustainable by 2460, but not, that's what I'm actually listening for, to find out if my technical decision was wrong.
So, like, just one observation, having been coming here for a long time, right? So, like, if you're deaf and you're listening to music, it doesn't matter how loud you turn the volume up, right? It doesn't matter. So, if you ask the same questions to the same people, you're gonna get the same answers, just perhaps more of them in greater volume, right? So, my view of your responsibility is you should be doing some additional homework other than asking the same people the same question.
I lost the last part of it, John. Can you get closer to me?
I said my view of your responsibility, right, is not to ask the same people the same questions and expecting a different answer, right? There's a definition for that, which I'll kind of hold off on for now.
Correct.
But my view of your responsibility is this is a big decision, especially in such a controversial topic. Your job is to do homework and to find out and to talk to people, not just expect people to come to you and offer them the same answer that they're being asked questions to, right? So you and I haven't had a conversation about this, right? That's a problem, right? Have you talked to my boss about this? I don't think you have, right? Right? Have you talked to other operators that we're talking to about the same thing? Have you?
But I'm expecting them to speak up, right?
Yes or no? Yes or no? Have you spoken to any of these people?
No, but like the last call, it's like people come and say
I'm
what they
talking
want
to
say,
you.
right? No. Right? Okay. I think Christian then Nalini.
Well, Nalini was in. Okay. Well, when I listen to this debate, I'm tiny bit disappointed because what I see is when I was to channel my friend Randy Bush, I see a debate between purity and practicality, and really, and what he would say is that the reason IPv6 is not deployed is not by lack of purity. And so I don't care what goes in the text. I really do not. But I'd like that whatever that process does has some kind of respectful unification in it, that basically you respect the view of the guys who are, for reason good or bad, trying to deploy something. Okay, just please put something nice there. Okay.
Thanks, Christian. Good. Nalini?
Okay, so I'm going to push back a little bit on a couple of things that Lorenzo said and then agree with him on some other things. There's a lot of people, frankly, who are not in the room, we know that and a lot of those people have not deployed IPv6. I talked to large enterprises, Fortune 500 companies in the US and other large enterprises across the world every single day of the week, multiple times. And they have not and OT deployed IPv6. They've not explored it. They may be doing some translation things at the edge of their networks to their websites. So if you're going to tell me that IPv6 is deployed to the extent that we would all like it to be, there is no way, shape, or form. And I think that Nalini's personal opinion, extension headers are one of the most incredibly wonderful things. And it's one of the biggest reasons to deploy IPv6. The capability that it gives to the extensibility to the protocol to really do many, many things is actually what's going to keep IPv6 alive and will be the reason to deploy IPv6 at many of these companies. Yeah, sure, if ISPs have it, wonderful. But what you really need is the banks, the insurance companies, the real core people to really deploy it. It hasn't happened, but I think but on the other hand, it's like there's a huge number of cycles in this argument, and to the point where I try to keep up, but I kind of like, okay, whatever, it's a lot of repeating is going on, and so I agree. It's like let's move on, and we can go ahead and we can revise. There's living things. So
Thanks. Ron next, then Jen. And then Jim. Oh, Jim, sorry.
Jim's been there a long time.
Okay. Go first.
I'd like to add one thing. I heard that the argument that we should, who should actually be deploying extension headers. But in this context, I think we should also be careful about people relying on the interpretation that extension header is not inserted in the middle of the node. For example, DNS servers assume the IPv6 packet using the minimal MTU will not be blocked due to the additionally added the extension header, for example. So even if those implementations do not extension headers, these actually rely on the current widely believed interpretation that extension headers are not inserted. And I think this point is equally important in this discussion. And by the way, I support your addition, and also the clarification by Brian is also a good idea.
Ron Bonica, Juniper Networks. I'd like to make a painfully obvious observation and then a proposal. The observation, the reason we're arguing about this is about half the people in the room are afraid that if this text is standardized, it will be impossible to standardize insertion mode for SRv6. Even if the right text is put in the SRv6 draft, that constrains it. That fear may be justified and it may not be. And there's only one way to find out. Here comes the proposal. Maybe the right thing to do, and I'd offer to work with Stefano on this, is for the two of us to go into a room and not come out until we come up with a short section of text that we can add to the SRv6 draft that makes insertion for SRv6 legal, even if this text is standardized. If we can come up with that text, then this whole issue becomes a non-argument. Stefano, any reaction? Would you be willing to try it? Tonight, neither of us sleep till we have the text. Neither of us will bathe again till we come up with the text. We promise.
Thanks, Ron.
And Jen, I think you'll get the last word on this particular slide.
Wow, too much responsibility. I want to make an obvious observation. A lot of routers in internet will already violated this text because they do process extension headers and every single ACL you have on your border router, right? What are we going to do with this?
Nothing.
No. We say it's not processed or examined by any intermediate node. And all my border routers do that, and I'm not alone, I'm pretty sure. So I think we already have a text which has nothing to do with reality.
Right, and thanks, Jen. And like I said before, right, we're not the internet police. We cannot stop people from doing whatever they want to do in their networks. Like it's very, very clear. We just explain how to do things in an interoperable fashion. Line. Mike line?
No, I think I think we're done.
At this level, the standard is supposed to reflect reality. And Jim makes a very, very good point. We still have that process word in there, and oh my goodness, we are processing. And that's that text in general. The spirit of that text is to codify the original wishes of the 2460 authors. And there hasn't been enough of a communication, for whatever reason, if it was John's reason or whatever reason, with the operators. If we're hearing this like, oh, we are processing it. Oh, wait a minute. How can I put this in the document? If the reality on the wire is violating it. I mean,
like, how can you
there's
like
something
codify all violations,
wrong.
Mark? Like that doesn't make sense. Okay, we cannot say like, hey, like routers can look at like URLs. Do you want that to codify in this document? What do you want to do? I don't understand.
It's a slippery slope. And this was Ule's point. I think he made it to the list at one point. That 2460, I mean, walking down this path of what routers can and cannot do in terms of processing and inserting opens up the world. I mean, are we going to get rid of, are we going to try to outlaw ECMP? Or are we going to outlaw, I mean, what? Right? I mean, we don't talk about what we do with ports. Are you allowed to look at the 5-tuple?
No, we don't talk about what else you cannot do, right? So what do you do with the headers here?
Tim, don't get up. Are you really going to get up? So Fernando, yes. So Fernando, I was lying previously. So Fernando is now getting really the last word for this particular slide, and I pressed the red button.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
So I'm trying to understand why we are having this discussion again. I mean, we had the discussion in the working group. There was an IETF last call. That was an outcome of that last call, and I see that we are still having a discussion for something for which a decision has already been taken. So I'm trying to understand why we are why we are having this discussion again, even in the context of it looks like we're having a discussion for the document that was published like 2-3 days ago, for the last call that finished like a while ago. I don't understand.
Okay, thank you, Fernando. Point taken. Suresh, even a better debate.
Next document. So 4291 best. So it was equally controversial, I would put it. And again, like it was like more like one issue that kind of took all the cycles, and that was the 64-bit boundary in the addressing architecture. And in this case, like I did speak to the operators as well, and on like kind of like both sides of this argument, and they were like very gracious in offering text suggestions. And what I realized is like the two sides of this argument are like so far apart that it's not possible to have some text that satisfies like the whole. So the removal is not acceptable to one set of people, right? So anyway, I don't think there's consensus for me to progress this document forward. So I'm going to send it back to the working group. If Mark wants to propose removal of this text, go ahead and do it in the working group process. And whenever it's ready, it's going to come back to me. But this is not getting progress as is today. Okay.
Any comments on that?
Forensibility, I think the IETF process is serving us well here in the sense that if we can't agree on anything, we don't do anything. Not sure if that's by design. I think for this particular issue, I agree with your poll, by the way. There's a strong divide, and the two camps didn't seem to be getting closer. I think we should take a step back, and we should, in this working group, start thinking about what it is that we lose by having this fixed boundary, and particularly looking at arguments that are applying to IPv6 specifically, and not to stuff that we learned from IPv4 necessarily, because the dynamics of addressing are completely different. Right? There's like the difference between 64 bits and 24 bits is huge. It's just something that our minds really struggle to comprehend. So we have to sit down and actually say, okay, let's look at the use cases. Let's look at what we want to do, and let's look at what the changes serve, and come up with something a little bit more encompassing, and find out what it is that we want to change, and then change it. And I think we have to do that in the working group. And I think wordsmithing this particular text is trying to change the implementation and not redesigning. If we want to this is a big change. If we want to do it, we have to redesign it properly. Right? That's the only thing. I think we have to start here with looking at use cases and see. Because one thing that I tried to push the proponents of the other camp to do is tell me what you can't do with 64 that you can do with 3 addresses. Tell me what you can do with $3 that you can't do with $1 million. Are you paying tax on the $1 million? Won't they fit in the wallet? Can you tell me what it is that you need that you can't do with a 64? And once we have those in mind, then we can say, okay, then now we know what to change and how. Just wordsmithing this text is not going to help. I really believe we tried that and we never got to consensus because people are too far away and there was no shared understanding of what we wanted to do.
Okay, thanks. Randy next and then Pierre.
I'm Randy Bush, IIJDRO. I'm kind of upset at the difficulties some people have had entering the United States. I'm not very fond of arbitrary borders. 64 is a magic number we came up with because of the good old IEEE max. That was a good idea until we hit the privacy problem. We really don't need any boundaries. By the way, I want to clear some people's possible misconceptions of what I've been saying. I actually use Slack. I think Slack's fine. I would be used at 56 Slack, but 64 Slack is fine. Right? RA is fine if you're on the Slack, RA, etc. side. DHCP needs the router option if you're on that side. I want to make it so my customer has choice and can do what they want to do. Right? You must be a true believer to run the network. Doesn't help V6, but it sure has helped Max CGM.
Okay, thanks. Pierre next.
Pierre Pister. So I think one reason why we haven't been able to find consensus on this text and a reason why this text is not exactly implemented in most widely deployed systems, it's because it tries to say something that should apply to all the IPv6 nodes whatsoever. And that's something that was brought up in the 6 Ops yesterday, is that, okay, it really depends on the use case and where the node is actually running. So maybe one way out for this 500 mails rattle of 500 engineers is to explicitly say the differences between different deployments.
Matt Mathis, for both this issue and the previous issue, it strikes me that they reflect deep tussles and paradigms underneath. There's actually precedence for an RFC 1122, which clearly lays out both arguments and describes different terminology and sort of says that both of them are acceptable. It doesn't take a position, but there's a bunch of musts and must-nots that must be consistently used depending on which side you're on. And in the end, both of those turn out to exist in the internet, and it doesn't matter. This is one way of answering this problem, especially if it's a tussle external to this conversation, which will ultimately be decided in the marketplace. It would be perfectly acceptable to document both correct answers and then have the decision occur implicitly later.
James, were you in line or just hanging around? Go ahead.
Yeah, Lorenzo Clemente, I think one thing, I really, personally, I don't think we should think about this here. We need time to think about it, time to write down the use cases, like Pierre said, figure out what it is that we want to do. One thing I think we really, I think this is, one reason I think this is a good outcome is that it really gives us time to consider these use cases, because Randy has a point that he wants his customers to do what they want, but we have to, but the other side of that coin is we are responsible for the stuff that gets done 20 years from now. If we make a decision, so this stuff is going to be with us for 3 or 4 decades, because that's how long V4 lasted. And we need to make sure that we design it for the long term, and that we don't really think about what's happened so far in IPv4. We have to think about what needs to happen in the future. And I think, to some degree, I think one of the things that we're struggling here is that our minds really think about in terms of what we have used for our entire careers. And for all of us, that's really IPv4. Everyone, even the earliest V6 adopters, the majority of them, they spent the majority of their career dealing with IPv4, and I think that's our mindset. And we need to try to break free of that, and we need to, think about what this needs to look like 30 years from now, and not what it looks like today. And I think, taking the time to sit down and look at the use cases is really going to help them.
Thanks. James?
James looking at Google. I spent a lot of time discussing this issue on the list. And since we're here in the meeting, I'd like to at least say a few things in person. One, Jinmei wrote a draft that talks about the distinction between subnet prefixes and onlink prefixes, and I wanted to commend him for that draft verbally, because it's a great draft. And he and I think, see pretty close to eye on the subject of this distinction being pretty important, and that the existing draft is not making the improvement I would like to see before it be advanced to standard, to clear up the confusion that can arise between the two concepts, subnet prefix and onlink prefix. A little bit I'd like to say about that, maybe this is repeating myself, but I'd like to do it at the mic, is that I really see that the distinction is important, because onlink prefixes are about a routing protocol distinction. It's, can you use neighbor discovery for addresses in this prefix, or must you send this to a router for forwarding? Subnet prefixes are all about address configuration for hosts. And I know that there are a lot of people who think that subnet prefixes are set at this 64-bit boundary because the only kind of address configuration where that matters is stateless address configuration, and they'd really rather not think that hosts are required to have a 64-bit interface identifier unless they are using Slack. But I think that some of the other people on the other side of this argument are thinking, no, it doesn't matter what kind of address configuration you're doing. Hosts have 64-bit IIDs, and that's entirely separate from the onlink prefix, which is the decision about whether to send to a router or whether you can use neighbor discovery. And that's the basic confusion that I think I still see present in the current draft, and the long message I wrote to the list that had a liberal and a conservative proposal for upgrading the text. I think some of that text, particularly the parts that were the same for both options, I think that could be added to the current revision of the draft, and that would make it an improvement that I would support taking to internet standard. Just to clear up this distinction of the IPv6 subnet model. That, I think, would be enough. Thanks.
Michael, last word?
I want to echo what James said. I think we really need to clean it up. Everyone put up their hands, those of you using the 10base2 in your homes. So none of you actually ever send... Oh, you are? Really? Yeah, okay. So none of you actually, all of you actually send your packets to a layer 2 switch to send to other people. So I think this whole notion of being on the wire has been dead for years, and we just haven't acknowledged it because of V4 stupids. And I think V4 thinking is to start thinking, gee, there is a switch in the middle, and it actually should be discoverable and traceable, and this whole on-link stuff maybe should just slowly die.
It should be a router.
Yeah, it should be a router. It should be layer 3 devices. We win, and those layer 2 guys go away. Yeah, and I think this is where it becomes more clear. We clarify this so that people's thinking, thinking, oh, there's devices in the middle that are not invisible, and when they break, my network breaks, and I need to know where they are. And that's not running around saying on link is probably pretty important.
Thanks. So, but this is a good topic to discuss. I'm not completely convinced it goes in this document, but we're going to have lots of time to talk about it.
Thank you. So 1981 base is like still ongoing. which is like a bit sad, but we are actually trying to see if there's any text that can be made which is not going to break existing implementations and still satisfies a lot of the kind of transport focus reviews that we got during the last call. So Bob is still iterating on this, and I haven't made a call yet on what to do with this, but it's looking very promising, but yet to be seen.
Yeah, I'm waiting. I proposed some text to the reviewers. Yes, well, several. This is like the third iteration, but yesterday, and I'm waiting to hear back. And once that's a little settled, I'll publish a new draft, and we can all look at it. So I'm actually think it's a big improvement to the document. I think it does solve all these, stops talking about old versions of TCP and just lots of stuff. And I think it does it without changing the protocol, but we'll have to decide whether it can still go to IS or whether it gets recycled to proposed or some other choice. So, but
yeah, so
I think it's coming along.
So that's pretty much the call. So once all the issues are resolved, like can we go to IS or like do we have to downgrade to proposed standard? And I think both are really on the table right now because we don't know what are the set of changes that are going to happen. It all looks like simple text changes, but we don't know what's going to break. So until we are sure that nothing breaks, we cannot take this to IS. Tim, did you want to make a comment? Okay, cool. Okay. So that's about it from my side. So next slide. Francis.
Francis Dupont. I am one of the people who asked for this. So I'd like to ask us to thank TrueEdge, Bob, and all the involved people for this great work. So we should have soon IPv6 a good sound. It's a great thing.
Thanks a lot, Francis. Coming from the first person who did V6, so that's very good. Thanks. Okay, so that's the summary. Let's put it that way. And so on the April 13 telechat, we're going to put this document 2460 bits up for discussion. And I'm really still open to hearing from people. So if this is something wrong and you can explain why, I'm really looking for why you think it's wrong rather than saying yeah, we want to do something. I'm still open to talking about it. And please feel free to come talk to me. I'm here all week. And so the other two documents in place, they're going to go in. There's been no comments on them. So that's promising. So everybody looks happy with that. So that's going on the telechat. 4291 base is coming back. 1981 determination yet to be made. So it could either come back to the working group, go as IS, or get downgraded to proposed standard and go on. But it's still in play. Okay, and I will update whenever we have some better info about that.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Suresh, and good to see that you got away with that without anything but mental scarring. The next speakers are Tim and Tim on the node requirements update. The Tims, yes. Yes, good. Thank you.
So this is a node requirements update. This document's been updated. It was originally written 11 years ago, and this is an update. We're going to talk about, we have some questions for the group, so feel free to jump in when we get to the questions at any slide, or we can just do them at the end. So here's a little bit of history on the document. We've put out 2 versions of this draft. We still have a couple of sections that have the word biz in there where we're thinking we haven't put text in. It's basically TBD. If you're going through the document, just type in the word biz and it'll get you to the right spot. Today we're going to talk about a couple of things we've changed already and then a couple of questions we had for the working group to get sort of the temperature of the room. Okay.
Did you say next?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, sorry. Things we've changed so far include we've updated basically to match 2460 biz, so atomic fragments, all of that stuff. We put that in there. ND enhancements, privacy addressing. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. We also added some of that Slack enhancements in there. We took out the mobile V6 based on the working group comments from last time. We just removed that text. That's really V6. What we did add is we added some text if you want to go read the 3G stuff. If you're a node and you're reading this document, go read the 3G documents. And then we updated some of the address selection. Next. All right, so this is the first big change we wanted to ask the group about. In this case, the current text says for a should for DNS in the RAs, and we're wondering if this should be a must for host. Yesterday in V6 ops, there's a second draft that we're keeping in sync with. It's about routers and router requirements, and part of that conversation yesterday was having a must for this on the router side. You could also put it in this document and have it apply to both. So that would be something that we're like to get the work group feedback on. Next.
So do you want to take these?
Yeah, we can take it now if that works. Anyone have any strong feelings about this? Basically, we're going to leave it as a must if we don't hear anything. To change it to a must, and we'll put that in the document.
I see Eric slowly walking up. Is there a question?
Oh, well, I mean, I just said, does anybody have any strong feelings? I was just going to say +1.
+1, okay. Good, thanks. So the original doc had MLD v1. The second rev they put out there, they said, hey, there's 2 versions of MLD. Go read these documents. We're going to suggest just doing MLD v2. Does anyone have, and I'm not aware of a whole lot of v1 hosts left that only do v1, but if that's going to be a problem, we should probably say something about that. Does anyone have any strong MLD feelings?
Dave Taylor. So for each of these, I think the real question in elevating things to must is there any use case for some constrained device that would still want to get, IPv6 ready logo, conform to this, and not actually need functionality that would be in a must, right? So I think that's the real question to ask. And so, for example, MLDV2 is required if you need to do source-specific joins, but it's not needed if you just need to do, neighbor discovery and other basic IPv6 functionality. And so if you can argue that some fixed function device that wants to get certified as IPv6 actually has to use MLD in order to get its job done, then a must is appropriate. If you can't make that argument, then no, must is not appropriate.
So the deal here, right, is MLD has this weird function of if you're v1, you force everyone on the link to v1. So there's some real bad implications of not having a v1 listener out there and recommending it. It does some bad things to the network. So in this case, that's really what our logic is. When getting into testing requirements in here, I think we're mostly interested in MLD v2 being used for neighbor discovery. Because if you don't do the right things in MLD for neighbor discovery, we're in real trouble.
Tim Chang, so we should get that point about MLD v1 into the document already, because that's a very good point. Secondly, I think node requirements is about general nodes. I think that's what it says at the start. There is a section in there about constrained devices that we're adding. So we can be, in that section, we can be a little bit, have some weasel words in there about what you need to consider if you are on a constrained device. But the document itself is general node requirements.
Yeah,
that might work. That's the approach we would discuss.
Yeah, that might work.
Brian Carpenter. Quite recently, I've been sending quite a lot of packets to FF02::114, and I want them to arrive. I have encountered networks where they didn't arrive, and it's all because MLD2 was not properly supported. So I very strongly support the must, because otherwise I think it's going to be basically impossible for people to deploy new link local multicast solutions.
Okay, thanks.
Dave Taylor, I think your explanation is fine. Put that into the document. And I don't remember if MLDV2 already has a should versus a must or anything in terms of support for like source-specific multicast, which would not need source-specific joins. And so I don't know if you need any clarifying text there that says what you need is you need to.
Yeah, we probably should put that in there. I agree. The way MLD is written now, the way 3810 has it, it basically says you get the whole full boat. I think this is where there was an MLD v2 lightweight version that sort of says this. I think we can steal some text from that, just telling people, look, you don't need to do source-specific multicast. We just need the regular messages to work for the purpose of ND.
Exactly. So I think that is important to clarify, because we want this to scale down to IoT devices and so on.
Yeah. Okay, I'll put that in there.
This is Alex Petrescu.
So, with respect to a list of items on one of the earlier slides, one protocol that has been removed from the list, the mobile IPv6 protocol.
Yeah.
I think I heard you saying based on some comments you received.
Yeah, on the list, we asked if anybody had implemented it. In this case, we just don't think it's a general. We got, I saw your thread originally last year when we talked about this. The reason we took it out was because there wasn't a whole lot of interest in keeping it in there from people. If people are deploying mid v6, we'll put it back in. But I got the impression that people didn't want to give the idea that that's widely deployed or should be deployed.
Okay, so I have some news from you. Recently, a open source implementation of mobile IPv6 called UMIP has been taken by a certain company to be maintained, Arthur. It has been maintained in the recent years, but there was a window of about 1 year being dead, but now it has been taken over by another company, and I think it is worth being mentioned here. And,
okay.
Yeah.
We'll take that to the list. Yeah, I'll see if we get more.
So in 2023, when we do the BIS on this, we'll probably bring it back in.
Yeah.
So at the moment, it's just saying nothing is fine. You can obviously include it. The fact it's not in the text doesn't stop you doing it.
Shrikandavelli Cisco. I have the same comment as Alex. I think on a BIP6. I think I rather have additional discussion before you take it out.
We'll put it back in, no worries. All right, so this one's about PathMTU. So there's been a lot of comments, a lot of these had to do with the 1981 going to internet standard. So, a lot of people expressed some doubts that, 1981 is going to work on the wide internet. What we're proposing today is that we should probably put in that 4821, which is the newer version, basically, should be supported, and we should go, 1981 should fall off the plate, basically.
Carrie Lynn. Is there still a requirement that nodes are required to reassemble a packet of at least 1,500 octets?
So that's the reassembly stuff is in 2460. So yeah, we'll be okay. I mean, 1981 is really the processing of the packet too big from offlink. So we're still okay when it comes to fragment reassembly. All that stuff should be good.
Okay, I'm not sure that that's supported in many constrained implementations, and I think it's something that we've kind of swept.
Yeah,
under the rug.
fragmentation in constrained environments is a dicey proposition at the moment.
So from that standpoint, I would say there's probably many constrained implementations that are currently out of spec.
Yeah, so Tim mentioned earlier, we have a constrained section, and I think that's one of the topics we can probably cover when we get down there.
Brian Carpenter. So I have a little bit of difficulty with your proposal for two reasons. First of all, whatever gossip is, 1981 does actually work on many, many paths on the internet. Right. So I don't think that should be downgraded to a should. The other point is that 4821 seems to me to be a seriously underspecified document.
All right.
I don't think it means anything to say it should be supported because it's so non-specific. I'm not even sure why it's on the standards track. So I think 4821 should be updated is my actual conclusion. So I'm not against the should be supported, but I think it's fairly meaningless because people don't know what to do when they see those words, which is why I think 1981 has to remain as mandatory until we have a 4821.
Yeah, Brian, I think that makes a lot of sense. 4821 depends on 1981. Lots of protocols we have only have 1981 because 4821 doesn't specify how to do that for tunnels, for example. So it is way premature, in my view, to take 1981 off the plate, for sure. That was Ole without the chair hat on.
Okay, I think correct here. 1981 should, in my opinion, remain as a should.
Okay, sounds good.
Ensuite du point, I agree with Brian Carpenter. You should keep the 1981 as a should.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, Mark's back here. Okay. Yeah, I was going to say something similar. So I agree with Brian. This is not the internet node requirements, this is node requirements, right? And so this has to be applicable in all scenarios, including things that aren't connected to the internet, just across a LAN or across, and by the way, switches can send ICMP packets too, so path-MT discovery is actually legal within a single subnet, right, when you have different entities.
Yes.
And so because of backwards compatibility issues and so on in environments that have these, I think we still need to keep it as a should. Now it's a requirements document, so people can always not do the should anyway.
Right, but
And so that's why, to me, it's not a big deal no matter which way we go here. I won't strongly object anyway, but my preference is to add 4821 as a should and keep 1981 as a should, at least for this iteration.
okay, I think that sounds like a reasonable. We'll tag them both on there.
It could also say one or the other must. And either
I thought about that, and maybe that's something we can talk about. The problem is as Ule pointed out, I think you actually need parts of 1981 to do 48.
Yes, I'm the
Matt,
author.
the reason that neither is a must is if you are a constrained node and you only send 100 byte packets, you never need to do either.
Let me just jump in. Yeah, so that what's actually in 1981 and in the BIS document is that it says you should implement it, but a minimal IPv6 implementation may choose to omit it.
Yeah. Okay. So this is an interesting one. So there's the address one that's out that says, giving hosts multiple global addresses. We wanted to talk about host having to support DHCP PD to get multiple addresses as a solution to this problem as that draft suggests. Go ahead.
Francis Dupont, I have two comments. First, for people who didn't read the reference IFC, it's not a typo, it's perfect delegation. And so for us, so this was uncommon some years ago. And second, I don't know if you have contacted the DHC working group. It's the session is today.
Yeah.
So because perhaps you have some details to change or to warn about because of this new use of public delegation. But for instance, I believe some implementations strictly enforce 64 limit for public delegation. Perhaps for this kind of use should be relaxed.
Okay. Lorenzo, and I'm in the line after Lorenzo.
Lorenzo Culiti. So, as a host developer, we considered implementing DHCP6PD, and then we asked every network operator we could find, are you going to support this? And the answer is like, not really. So, we're not aware of any sort of, you can't connect, typically you can't, you don't typically connect a device directly to a network that supports PD, because those typically have non sort of like data link types that aren't available to hosts, like coax or DSL, right?
That's a common case.
And so that's one thing. Another thing is, if you do PD by default on a home network, then you'll basically, if you've got 12 devices doing PD on your home network, then you're going to run out of your /60. So I'm not, I don't know how practical this is, because I don't know. On the one hand, there's very few networks that support this, and the ones that do, you might end up doing damage. So I think it's premature to say this. I would like to support PD, but every mobile carrier that we've asked, can you do prefix delegation for
no.
IPv6 tethering, has said no, we don't support that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay.
So since I was next in the queue, and if I can stop this thing. Yeah, there we are. I'll give ourselves 10 more minutes. I agree with Lorenzo. I also agree. I think it is a bit premature to do this. We also have 3 different mechanisms to do sort of these things. We have PIOX, we have PD, and we have HNCP. as one of the authors of the HPPD, I'm not a particular fan of PD, but strictly speaking, here this would make it a router, right? So if you do PD, you must be a router, unless you change PD in various ways, because the way it works with prohibiting you from treating the delegated prefix as on linked on the same interface that you do the client. But this, who did I talk to that wanted to do permissionless extension of the network, which this kind of is, that you can sort of, build your own subtopologies downstream, is a very interesting work item that I think we should work on. But right now, I feel we would do that as a separate item and then perhaps bring it into the node requirements when we've reached some sort of conclusion.
Okay, so that was going to be my next question. Do we want to say anything about those three options to do this and just sort of say, go read those things, or should we just be silent on this for the moment?
Alessandro?
Yes, so put that way, I think I agree with it. To give it a little bit more time before having the HTTP PD for hosts in this node requirements document. The distinction between a host and a router is a very fine distinction that is very, very difficult to make. Okay, people, for example, if somebody says he or she is a host developer, okay, what is that host? Is it a host or something with multiple interfaces that also routes?
Right, and just to remind everyone, this is node requirements, so we try to stay out of that if we can in this document everywhere. We try to just talk about the Venn diagram, the stuff that goes over both of them. So in this case, yeah, noted. Thanks.
And Eric, and then Fred.
Yeah, two things. One, you certainly can't say anything about PIOX. To your earlier question, Tim, because it's not even a working group item.
Not yet, yeah.
And secondly, a question for the chairs. One of the reasons I stood up is I have a question about the document not related to any of the slides we've seen so far, and I don't know how much time there is left.
Can you say that again?
I have a question about the document, or a comment about the document.
Okay.
Unrelated to any of the slides we have seen so far, and I don't know if time is
I think
running
we
out.
have two more.
Yeah, let's see if we can slot that in at the end. Fred?
Yeah, Fred Templin from Boeing. Just wanted to mention that we're using DHCP prefix delegation for hosts inside of our enterprise mobile devices like cell phones and tablets and things. Also, we're looking to use it for the airplanes and for unmanned air systems.
Okay. Thanks.
So, Dave Taylor, I think this document should not talk about DHCP at all. I am a fan of DHCP, but I don't think it belongs in the node requirements document. Right? PD is appropriate for things that act as routers, or for some definition of router, like there's various variations, right? Maybe using it for a loopback interface internally, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think it applies to general nodes, and so I think this is the wrong document.
Okay, so go ahead. This one I think will be pretty straightforward. The current old version basically mentions SNMP and MIBs. I think we should update this section and talk about netconf and Yang. I don't think we're going to make any major requirements here. Just sort of, in this case, we'll try to stay in line with the router requirement doc. We're going to add, obviously we're going to talk about the privacy addressing updates that have happened since the original draft came out. We also, do we think about people who are doing DHCP should follow the anonymity, the privacy profile for DHCP. We're going to add that as a should. If no one runs the mic, I'm going to leave it as that for right now. No, people are moving.
Dave Taylor, on the top one, I think that's good as long as it's phrased correctly, because the must be configurable is if you do support it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Absolutely.
The point of the privacy being a should is if you have a fixed function device that's meant to be, say, a public web server or something, you don't need privacy on something that's meant to be public, right?
Bernie, Lorenzo, and then Eric. Bernie.
Here, first, Bernie.
Go ahead. Bernie, go.
Bernie Volts. Regarding the profiles issue, I think that maybe just saying, pointing to it and saying if the device is a device that might be a very mobile device where privacy is a consideration, that it should be strongly considered.
Okay.
Lorenzo.
I think, for maybe we can say something about devices that identify users or devices that are, maybe mobile devices. I think with pervasive monitoring as an attack, it kind of suggests that we should be doing this stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know if we can get consensus on must be supported. I think, well, can we say that must be supported? I mean, I'm not aware of any implementation that doesn't do it. Whether they're on by default, I guess, can we change the top should to must? You can't do.
Yeah, that was what Dave argued no to that because you have constrained devices. I think
can
there are
we-
cases for this. I also think we might add a whole section for privacy.
Can we say that on a general purpose host, then we change that to must?
Maybe. Let me take
All
that
right.
back to the list. Let me go figure out what we want to do there. I think we might add a privacy section just to talk about all the changes that have happened.
So I would like to point out that for 7844, for the people who like DHCP6, 7844 discourages DHCP6 stateful. So if anyone cares about that, they should say that. I don't. I think DHCP6 is really bad for privacy. But if somebody cares about that, they might want to speak up. I support that.
Carrie Lynn, I think the text that talks about this behavior should be configurable. That comes from one of the privacy drafts.
Yeah.
Relates specifically to global scoped addresses.
Yep.
So we might want to, get into some finer detail about,
Okay.
or point to some other document that describes this in, greater specificity.
I think that's fair. I don't think we want to go into a deep privacy discussion in this
Yeah.
draft. I think we just want to point to the stuff that's out there and say, go do some reading.
I'm David Skenazy, Apple. Could you clarify what you meant by must be configurable?
So in several places, including, I think it actually says it in the original draft, there's a must in there that says that you must be able to turn it off and on, basically, if memory serves. Yeah. Yeah, well, that's true too. I think that may be the answer, is not to say anything about this and just leave it as the current 4941 text.
So I think I have a clarifying question about that.
Yep.
Must be configurable by who?
So you got to go read that draft. It doesn't say by who. It just says you must be able to turn it off and on.
Well,
It's been a while since I've read that draft, so don't quote me on this. Don't come up with text.
right. Well, I mean, the reason I'm asking about that, and I think that the text is not clear, is that does it satisfy the requirements to make it so that I, as a manufacturer, make it so that I can choose whether the manufactured products have it turned on or off, but the actual owner does not.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, if people want to update that, I'll have to go reread it. I'll take a look and see what it says now. I mean, I think at best, like I said, I think what we're going to do in this document is point to the privacy drafts and say, go read these, and you can take it up with the updating of that. I'd have to go reread that text, though. I don't have it memorized. Right. So we didn't touch this section. We know this is going to be a problem. If people want to send us comments about this original version does have a little bit of I don't want to call it a history, but basically lays out that there are two different ways to do these things, and here are the options. It's still there. And now go ahead and if people have any general comments. I heard Eric had one.
Yeah, Eric Coyne. I was wondering whether or not 8028 should be considered for inclusion in this document, the multi-homing behavior stuff.
So
Because
Brian sent that comment too, and I think we have a note to put that one in there. So yes, I think the next rev we will put something like that in here to talk about that.
Okay, cool. I look forward to it. Thanks.
Okay. The only other two last things was informational or BCP. The previous two versions of this were informational, and we were thinking possibly BCP this time.
Lorenzo Clearly, if you want it to be a BCP, you have to remove the dragons. Because saying like, oh, historically blah, and then we're not sure, and then perhaps, and then and then you have to strike the section.
All right, so to go to a BCP, it would be we'd have to take on the dragons. Okay.
No, you'd have to delete the text about the drag.
I agree. Right. We'd have to deal with the problem and just either go. I mean, it is an option to go silent on it, but
I mean, yeah. So that like if you go back to that text, if you go back a slide.
No.
No. Well, I mean, my point is, my point is, it's speculative, and like having speculative text in a BCP is kind of not useful. Right?
I think that's good feedback. If we want to make it a BCP, we're going to have to deal with that text. I think that's a fair.
And if you're not, we can discuss that text at our leisure, I'm sure. At length.
I'm sure you'll have.
But I think we can do BCP versus informational. That is, this is an individual document at this point. I think it's premature to discuss that.
Okay.
Yes.
Dave Taylor, I don't think it's a big deal either way. I do whatever is actually easier. I think there's enough evidence that the existing RFCs, in whatever status they're at, right, informational, have already had kind of the impact that we wanted. And so, in other words, it's already referenced in various places on the IP6 Ready program and DISA and other things that use that as a precedent for constructing their own requirements profiles. And so, whatever is easy is fine. If it's easy to go to the other one, but it sounds like it's not. And so I would say there's enough evidence that leaving it as is still has the impact we want.
Okay.
So we're now going to do an adoption call. One last comment, Tim.
So I think there's a good point. So I think wait and leave it. It does get adopted and it does get through to the point where we're about to put it forward, discuss whether it's suitable as a BTP then when we know what's in it.
Yeah, sounds good.
So we do think that this document is ready for an adoption call. So the people in the room who want us to adopt this document, can you please hum now? And those who oppose? Thank you. Okay, so we will adopt this document barring a confirmation on the mailing list. Thank you. PIOX, and that's Eric or Michael.
Hello. Let's see. So I apologize for sending O2 out during the week. I'm not even going to ask who's read it. It still has some unfixed items that were notes from Sol. But anyway, here goes. Do I need a clicker? No. Okay.
You need to say next very clearly.
I need to see next slide, please. Yes. So first, a reminder what we're talking about here. Next slide, please. This was essentially motivated by thinking about what I would like to do as a host on a network that, like John Brzezowski was deploying, where every device gets its own /64 on, let's say, a Wi-Fi network. The infrastructure is usually involved in that, and keeping them into separate sort of layer 2 domains. But the deployment has many advantages. I think John's document is in V6 ops, but it would be nice as a client to know that that was the infrastructure I was operating on. It's taken implicitly in 3GPP, RFC 7066 documents, sort of that architecture. But it would be nice to know when I can't take it implicitly, like from Wi-Fi, it'd be nice to know explicitly, so that I can do things like not worry about ND proxying when tethering toward USB and or Bluetooth or that sort of stuff. And anyway, next slide, please. So this was the proposal. This slide is updated with the R bit that I found from 6275. Essentially, for anybody who hasn't read this, we're just basically taking this, adding an extra bit that says, by the way, you own this entire prefix. So, do with it as you see fit. It should be backward compatible because everybody's required to ignore flags that they don't recognize. None of them are deemed critical for processing. And devices that don't recognize it will just do DAD. Nobody will answer, and they'll be fine. Next slide, please. So there are some changes from Sol. One is in -01. I had tried to be super clever about validating the RA with the PIOX in it. I'm not capable of being super clever. It's also brittle. So the new text just says that basically the PIOX flag is a feature that the infrastructure can offer clients, and we rely on the infrastructure not to be broken. Anything else is a misconfiguration. I updated the flag location after finding the R flag, and there's some additional text that says, if you see the R flag, you have to ignore the X flag or treat it as X equals 0 because they're mutually exclusive. The R flag says, here's a prefix, and by the way, the rest of the bits after the prefix length are the router's address, and if the router has taken an address for itself, it can't be exclusive. So let's see, Alex Petrescu said that I should clarify that the router must not configure any addresses for itself from the exclusive prefix, and there's text in there that says that now. And more broadly, there's a small section about differences between DHCP6 PD and the semantics, and the two items that are in there are, one, the PIOX is router refreshed, so refreshed to the client, not client refreshed. That's just a semantic difference. And the other difference is that 3633 still has some text about the receiving, let's say, node is not allowed to configure any of those addresses on the interface through which it received the PD. But this is kind of exactly the kind of use case we want to support here, especially for backward compatibility. So there's also some text about that. The rest of the presentation is basically slides from Sol. They're there. I included them, I guess, next slide, or you can jump to the end. Everything after this is just stuff that was in the IETF 97 presentation. And so, yeah, questions, comments? Does anybody actually care about this?
Sure, Cisco. I didn't read the spec, but I have a quick question. So the link model is not a shared link model, like you took the 3GP example. So the assigned prefix is for the mobile node, that's implied, right? In that scenario, is the X flag still relevant?
Your question is, would the X flag be useful on 3GPP?
On such link models, yeah.
I don't think, well, it's not harmful. It's probably not useful in cases where the node knows that it's on that link model. If there were some like intervening device that changed the link so that you were like one hop away from knowing what that link was, then having, but somehow it was like essentially a bridge, then having the PIOX flag would be useful in that case.
Right.
Like if you had a device that was just like a LTE to mobile bridge with some fancy filtering in the middle, then adding an X bit flag could be useful.
Right. So in 5213, where the MAG assigns the prefix, the prefix is unique for the mobile node. Excuse me. The assumptions was somewhat, based on the assumption that the mobile node knows the link model. So,
The assumption was?
Sorry. There's an implied assumption that the mobile knows the link model. Based on that, it's assuming that the prefix is unique to that mobile node.
Right, and 7066, the document's the same thing. It's just that like there are certain cases where you could be, the link model is not implicitly segmented links. Sorry, L2 separated. But it would be nice to basically communicate that to the host.
All right. Yeah. Thanks.
Alexander.
So, Alex Petrescu, I have two comments. One comment that also relates a little bit to an earlier discussion, the node requirements and the dragons. Okay, are we creating a new dragon? How is this helping or not helping with DHCPv6 prefix delegation?
Are we creating a new
dragon?
Sorry. I don't know. The intent was just to basically, if I have a device that's on /64 per host Wi-Fi kind of segment, to be able to tell the host that so that I can make extra use of that.
Isn't it what prefix delegation is doing?
Perhaps, but it's not backward compatible.
Backward compatible.
In this sense, like, so John's /64 per host Wi-Fi architecture allows hosts that have no knowledge of any of the stuff, PD or PIOX, to just function in regular Slack mode. Right. This is like an upgrade between them.
So you are saying that just take a host that runs today router solicitation, router advertisement, adding a bit, and it is backward compatible somehow to an earlier life where it didn't have this bit.
That's correct.
Okay. But still running DHCPv6 also is backward compatible with that earlier life where router advertisement continues to run without the X bit, and there would be a new DHCPv6 prefix delegation client on the host. So that would still be also backward compatible. And this would create a new...
It's not mutually exclusive with PD. You could have PIOX and PD at the same time. It's just that there's no way in sort of the negotiation to say, as I understand it anyway, there's no way, for example, a host to attach to a /64 per host Wi-Fi architecture and first then discover if there's PD possible, and until then the link is unnumbered. And then, oh, if PD isn't possible, then let's go ahead and have the link be numbered. Like, there's no way to sort of do that. You can't have one or the other. The link can be unnumbered with PD, it can be numbered with PD, or it can just be numbered without PD. And the idea is if it's numbered without PD, then
unnumbered links? Yeah, okay, so maybe
local only.
But I think you're right, Alexander. There is you have to at least look at these various use cases where PD belongs and where PIOX could belong. But I
it's
think
not mutually exclusive, though. I can say that.
Right. And but I think the draft also explores that to some extent with the new revision. But I suggest we move on to Lorenzo.
Okay, and the second.
No, he had two questions, right?
Yeah, and the second was there are two other earlier drafts. One of them I am a co-author of it, in which we propose to realize prefix delegation by using router solicitation, router advertisement. Okay. And in case, so we could say at this time there are two drafts realizing probably the same functionality, prefix delegation with router advertisements.
Okay, yeah. Okay. I mean, is that draft still being discussed? Is it active?
Well, it is in the archive. It is expired. If needed, I could resurrect it.
We would have to have a discussion again with the operators about whether or not they're going to provide that.
But please send a pointer to that draft.
Again, also would not be mutually exclusive.
Okay, I've sent a pointer. I will send it again.
Lorenzo.
Lorenzo, I mean, I think this is great. What this does is there are a number of links, lots of them actually, where the device is actually getting an array, and it kind of knows sometimes based on the link layer technology that it has the whole 64. So on 3GPP networks, but it would be nice to be able to signal that in IPv6 as opposed to basically baking it down into the link layer and having to know that you have that you're on a 3GPP network, and therefore that array that you got means that it's exclusive to you. I think this is useful to signal in IPv6, and I think it's definitely useful to do in other in other link layers where you might want to take this model. To Alex's point, I think the problem with doing with using PD here is that you have to provision separate networks, because today, even if you turn on PD, you have to leave the array with the A bit on for anything to work at all, because any non-updated host will need that array. And so basically now you have to configure two things and manage two things and make sure that two things are reliable. But instead, given that you have to send the array anyway, you basically got the hosts that understand the X bit can benefit from this new ability to know that they can form lots of addresses, and the hosts that don't, they continue to work as they do today. I think that's an advantage here.
Dave?
Hi, David Skenazi, Apple. I want to say I really like this because today, if the network tells me to use this prefix, I get an array, and if I were to have to go then make a DHCP query and all that to get the PD, this one bit done, I got all the information. I love this, and I would love to see this discussed in this working group.
Good. Is there? Yes. Let's do Fernando at the end here. On pressing the red button.
Okay, Fernando. Yeah, my concern is that we are duplicating a lot of functionality. For example, stuff that is in stateless DHCP version 6 in arrays and vice versa. And I wouldn't be surprised if we end up in a scenario in which we have implementations that support this option, but do not support PD, and vice versa. And I think that would be a bad outcome. So it's not that I'm concerned about this proposal, but I think that, when we start duplicating everything and then we end up, with different implementations implementing different things, I don't think the outcome is right. And I wouldn't be surprised again if we would end up in scenarios in which you'd have to do both this option and PD, because in order to support, all implementations, some that do one and some that do the other, the only really able way of doing that is supporting both. I think we should take a step back and try to figure out, what's the best option to do these kind of things, so that we can be sure that with a single mechanism we can support all systems. This looks like similar to what we have right now, with DNS information. Two different options to do one thing, different implementations supporting one or the other. So real network had to do both. So I wouldn't want to end up with something similar, but for prefix delegation.
Yeah, thank you, Fernando. That's a good point.
Well, I don't think they're not mutually exclusive, right? I mean, this is not about PD, or this is about like here's a prefix that I'm telling you that that you get, and in a backward compatible way, I'm also telling you it's yours.
Right.
You're just being informed that the router has delegated it to you. You haven't asked for it.
I think we'll do two quick comments and then we'll move on, please.
Jeff Handel, Cisco. Just to understand the context, by providing client isolation, other than the security benefit, could the unintended consequence also be, because you're reducing chattiness, could it be battery conservation on the mobile devices also as well?
Yeah, in the document there's some text about there's like some energy efficiency kind of stuff that you could do as well, right? If you're aware that you're the only person on this link, then you might do, for example, DNSSD discovery for a proxy server, and if it's not there, then you don't do DNSSD at all.
9 seconds left. I think I tried to cut the queue. Fred, if that's okay. And last comment, please. Yeah. If you can talk over that one, you can do it.
Mark Andrews. I think we need to say something with words that this is a way of getting a single prefix. Rather than, you still need to support PD for the general case where you need 2 or more prefixes to be handed out. So making sure that sort of gets in there so that into the draft, so you make it definitely clear that this is not something to take away PD.
I can add that.
I realize this, but we all know that
there's a reason it's a flag in the PIO, right?
We've got tethered devices, and they take this and they get their 1/64. They can play with.
But so I think at this point we'll take this to the list. I mean, it's good to see this much interest on this draft. So I think we'll continue on the list. And Fred, you are actually up here in the ping pong.
Okay. Just very quickly, the router has to know that the host is authorized to receive the prefix that is being advertised. And so there might be some interactions with secure neighbor discovery. With DHCP v6, we have
Fred, we have to take this to the list.
There could also be lower link layer security stuff like 802.1x.
Okay, so Fred Templin from Boeing. I want to present a draft that's co-authored with James Woodyot. This is route information options and redirect messages. So the history of the draft is that we posted it to the list in January 9th, and we received quite a few comments on the list, and that resulted in a draft update. The update was published on January 31st, and that also resulted in several comments. And we're in a holding pattern on those comments. We had resolutions posted to the list, and they seem to be acknowledged. So we're in a holding pattern to update the version to version 2 right now. And then you have the pointer to the draft. Well, here is the classical redirection scenario. You have a source, a router, and a target all in the same link. And that target might be a router that has either a complex network behind it or maybe it's one of these hosts that received a /64, for example. The source sends its packets through the router initially. The router forwards the packet to the target and also returns a redirect message to the host. And after getting the redirect message, the host can the source can send the packets directly to the target. Next chart. So there's this other document, RFC 4191, that defined route information options, but they were defined for the inclusion in route advertisement messages. These RIOs inform recipients of routes that are reachable via the router that sent the RA message. RFC 4191 defines 3 types of hosts. Type A and B ignore RIOs. Type C process RIOs and update their routing tables based on those RIOs. Now in our draft, we have identified a 4th type of host that we're calling type D. What type D hosts will do is the same as a type C, but they also process router information options in redirect messages. Next chart. So in the RIO redirection scenario, we have the source again sending packets towards the destination via a router. The router forwards the packets to the target, but also sends a redirect to the source, and the redirect includes the target address set to the address of the target, destination address of the redirect set to the unspecified address, the IPv6 unspecified address. The redirect includes a target link layer address option with the target link with the target's link layer address, and it also includes a route information option with the prefix that's owned by that target. For example, 2001 DB81264. Next chart. Use cases and next steps. As I mentioned at the mic earlier, we have enterprise mobile devices like cell phones and tablets that we're using in Boeing right now. Aeronautical communications for airplanes, air traffic controllers, etc. Unmanned air system networks for vehicle-to-vehicle as well as vehicle-to-controller communications. And then also home networks with multiple subnets, such as in the HomeNet scenario. Next steps are to prepare an update based on list comments that we received, and we'd like to see if there's interest in having this as a 6-man working group item. That's the end of the charts.
Any comments? Eric, you managed to get your first.
It's good to have long legs. A question of, if you can go back to the architecture slide, sorry, the network diagram. Yeah, even this one's fine. Thank you. One thing I didn't understand from the document, or was why could the target just send out its own RA with a default router lifetime of 0, including RIOs in this scenario?
So there's a couple things there. First of all, the host is not going to accept an RA unless it's coming from the first hop, its current first hop for that prefix. So in this case, the host would only accept the RA coming from the router. The second thing is that if you were to have that target send router advertisements with RIOs, there might be a RA guard function working on the link that would discard those RAs. So that's why we see the need for a redirect to carry these.
Okay.
What? I'm sorry. What?
Yeah. I'm sure Dave's been nodding, so he might have similar questions.
Dave Taylor, I have similar confusion as Eric. I start off wondering, which I still don't know the answer to, why it says destination address set to ::. But what I'm worried about is attack possibilities, because the target in this example is the router that's authoritative for that particular route, right? And so you need to have, we have ways with secure neighbor discovery to secure arrays, right? And in this example, the one that's labeled router is not authoritative for that prefix. So this could be used as a redirect attack that says, oh, I'm just going to spam a bunch of stuff at him, and he's not the right guy to be saying that it's authoritative, right? Secure neighbor discovery, the router that's authoritative for it is responsible for saying he's authoritative with it in a signed way. And so that's why I would have expected, as Eric said, the target to send the RA, even if the redirect just says you should pay attention to RAs from that guy, right? Then you don't need the prefix in there. It just says, no, for that particular address, go and make sure you're getting RAs from this other guy. And then he's the one that sends a signed RA if you're using security with your RAs. And I don't see why that wouldn't work. So I guess that was my confusion.
Let's drain Lorenzo's cues, and then it's James.
So I'm the router, right? I'm the person who's authoritative for this whole thing because I got maybe a prefix delegation from upstream. Now, I delegate part of this. I delegate this 1.2/64 to the target.
Right.
Now I know that's not routable anymore. How do I delete it?
I'd delete the route. Well, now, are you saying how does the router step in and delete the route?
Yeah.
The target's going to get a delegation lifetime when it gets to that /64. And that's going to be valid for the delegation lifetime. And then the target has to go back to the router to get it refreshed.
The router might not know this, right? If it supports reconfigure, it could know that thing is gone. Say that the router gets a PD for 2001 DB8, whatever, 1/48. And it says, okay, target, you own 2 right now.
Right.
Now, then it says, then the source sends a packet to that, and router says, hey, source, actually 2 is owned by target. And suppose the source says, okay, fine. Then the uplink gets renumbered, and router doesn't own 2001 DB8-1 anymore because it's renumbered. And so how does router tell source, by the way, target is no longer authoritative for 2? How do how does the router delete this?
So I'm a little bit confused as to why this is any different than for any standard DHCP prefix or exclusive bit or RA exclusive bit scenario.
Because you have unsolicited stuff that says this is no longer valid. It has a lifetime of 0.
Right.
Now, if router has already delegated this to source, even if it sends a lifetime of 0, source might not accept that because it's already been delegated to target. So it's like router has no way to tell source that 2 is no longer valid.
I think James might be able to address this.
So in this draft, we say that a type D host is capable of processing redirects. That does not mean that they stop processing router advertisements in route advertisements, right? So the way the router might do that is send an RIO with a valid lifetime of 0 for the entire prefix.
Right, but the semantics of the RIOs are such that it says if the router sends an RIO with a lifetime of 0, somebody else could send an RIO with a lifetime of non-0 and it would go there. So,
Okay.
so you can't withdraw my point is you can't, RAs don't allow you to withdraw someone else's prefix.
So let me talk about this in the HomeNet scenario, which is
So,
most familiar with it.
Unfortunately, we're almost out of time. How about if the folks at the mic just state their issue and then the discussion can happen on the list?
All right.
Okay, sorry, I have a few points. The first one is I think this proposal is interesting because one reason why RIOs weren't deployed very well is mostly in Linux. The reason why it's disabled by default, it's perfectly supported, but it's disabled by default, the RIO, is for security. I don't agree with this concern. I think it's a wrong argument, but the Linux maintainers decided that because of security, they wouldn't enable it by default. And maybe that addresses this issue because it's actually the router that you have as a default router that is going to say, hey, use someone else. A second reason why this might be interesting is also because it avoids putting too much stuff in the array. So in the case you have many prefixes, you would be able to not put everything in the array. I think you should put in the document as well that the redirect should apply only for the source address that is being used in the packet, because that's something new that's in RFC 8028.
Yeah.
Okay, you're aware of this one? Yeah. And finally, I don't think defining a type D host is the right way to do it, because it's kind of independent of processing RIOs. You don't need to be a type C host to be a type D host in your thing. You can just ignore RIOs and process those redirects. So I think it's kind of orthogonal.
Eric Deng, Cisco. Assuming that the target is also sending arrays with RIO that has been ignored by the source for any kind of reason, I don't see why the source will accept the redirect with RIO.
If it ignores the RIOs and the redirect, then the source will continue to send through the router. You'll keep going on the dog-leg route, and the router is going to send these things only rate limited. It's not going to send a redirect for every single message it receives.
Understood. Okay. But if the source is ignoring the array with RIO sent by the target, why would he ever listen to the redirect?
This depends on the deployment scenario. On some links, sources might honor the redirect with the RIOs.
We'll take one more from there, and then it's James and Alexander. It's Jeff from Cisco. So a lot of your applications going to aerospace is really interesting because that's all changing. Is the context ADSB? And if it is, ADSB is pretty much a whole bunch of ad hoc networks that need to talk to each other that could potentially become router and host all at the same time, and they all have to figure out how to best communicate and just relay that. And it's going to be a whole bunch of devices. So I do like that IPv6 is going to be part of it. Is that the context here?
Actually, ADSB is not the context for it. ADSB is a position multicasting type of scenario, but there are other links that airplanes use, like satellite links, L-band communication links.
Sorry,
VHF links.
we just need to express the concerns. We are out of time.
It's James.
Yeah, you can go.
Okay.
For what it's worth, we're turning on RIOs in Android. There'll be a no. Yeah, not this, but RIOs, yes.
Okay, Alessandro, and then
Okay,
James gets
so
about
I try to be quick. This is no concern. This is answer to some of the earlier concerns. Why is not the target sending the router advertisements? Maybe the target is a mobile device, and mobiles do not send router advertisements, even when they are routers. They not send arrays in the visited networks, okay? And the second, if you don't do this, if you don't put these prefixes in the redirection, okay, redirect happen anyways, but they are host-based. So you end up with many routing table entries in the source. So better do this prefix, okay?
Okay, James, do you want the last?
In fact, yes. One of the concerns I have that makes me want to support this draft and add my name as a co-author is that if you don't pass this draft, then any home gateways that I might be involved in specifying might actually do the redirections, but just for every host address. So if there are 1,000 nodes behind that target, and they are all something that that source wants to get at, that home gateway might in fact send a redirect for every single one of them, and I will fill up your neighbor cache full of, or your routing table entry or destination cache with individual 128s for all those little black boxes instead of just giving you the prefix. So that's why I want this.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Fred. All the routers I build have redirects disabled by default. Jerome.
Okay, thank you. I'm Jean François, and I represent a proposal. Oh, should I do my like that? Better like that? Okay, great. So just present some works that we did with my colleagues Abdelkader, Giovanni, and Marco. So this work actually is being presented in a DOTS working group, which is about the signalization of DDoS attacks. So what is the idea to present to you today is that because our proposal is to use out-by-up option of IPv6 to signalize DDoS attack. And of course, we saw the discussion on mailing lists regarding header sessions. That's why we wanted also to present to you and wanted also to follow your discussion. So yeah, so generally just to make it very simple, so what we want to achieve in the DOTS working group is to build a mechanism that when somebody knows there is an attack, what we could simply the client wants to advertise a server, which will trigger the mitigation of the attack. Okay, so of course you will have you can have some direct connection from 10 to 7. This will happen, but what can also happen is that as there is a DDoS attack running, the network might be very highly congested, and maybe your, let's say, original signal, using a standard signaling mechanism, cannot work. And our idea is to basically benefit of the first instant of the attack, mainly because we know that there are still packets that are able to continue and to be forwarding into the network, and to embed some information into this packet. So idea is not to create other packets. Of course, there will be standard signalization from other protocols that we propose in DOTS, but to have kind of, let's say, backup mechanisms to be able to propagate some information either up to a server or what we call a gateway. So so the main idea, of course, is to use, in our case, to use out-by-up option, such that basically we will encode the information about the attack into a first packet that then can be replicated at different routers, capable routers into the network, into other packets. So basically, kind of replication mechanism to be done in an opportunistic manner. Okay, so of course we know that there is many issue regarding using this kind of mechanism, particularly regarding resources that will ask in terms of performance, in particular when you're on the DDoS attacks. So the idea is that if you, just to clarify, is that we cannot really guarantee that it will reach the server. It's kind of really opportunistic epidemic approach, meaning that the packet and the information you are sending will not necessarily go through the congested path. So it's maybe better. And also, we don't say that we have, of course, to replicate into every packet. So we of course, this has to be defined. It's not we not define a final solution, but the user has to be defined a kind of strategy to select the right packet to be used to convey the information. Next slide, please. Okay, so I will not expand a lot on that, but of course we have different fields to include. Like for example, we have to include, of course, what is a victim, what is, for example, targeted port, and so on, what is the lifetime we have for the packets. Next slide, please. Okay, I think which is the most interesting that we wanted to present here is all dependent considerations we have regarding using this option. So so as I already said, one main issue is already that it will triggers, okay, because the packets have to be processed by at least some routers, not all of them, but some capable routers on the path. Okay, although there is some question regarding if the option can pass through the internet. In the working group in general, we have two use cases, intra and interdomain. Of course, we are more looking in this case for the intra-domain use case when you have more control on the infrastructure, and so you suppose that you can handle the option into the domain. Okay, but anyway, yes, you have to implement to modify a bit the implementation from different perspectives, from the client that have to send the information, the initial information, and then from capable routers that has to do two things to do. First, exploit information, store information, and re-embed into another packets as well. Of course, means that going through a slow path into the router, which is, you understand, from performance users, not the best. Okay, and yeah, okay, somebody also raised me the point that as we are using what we put in the option for doing some, let's say, application level processing, I mean, the mitigation of the DDoS, it may raise some issue regarding the header violation. We are also looking at the advanced socket APIs because we suggested to do the process we wanted. So something that we are now looking at. And yes, so of course I followed discussion in mailing list and now take decision regarding indoor extension. So what I understand that it's possible in particular if you're in your own domain, so which is great for us. There are also problems, for example, for NTU, but I think if you're in your own domain, you should be able to handle this. And that's okay. As I said, we will focus on the intra-domain use case for all this reason. And last slide, please. Okay, we move the last one because mainly just security consideration. We have also one who's in the current draft, including a signature mechanism for the information you convey. So here, yes, mainly my question to you is to really have some feedback and comment on using this kind of mechanism. I mean, the how your option for doing such things to know if it can be done or if it's completely unfeasible.
Hi, Chris Morrow, Google. Please don't do this. There's so many ways this is not right and wrong. Like, this is not a good idea. Right? Adding a bunch of work to routers in the core of the network, bad plan. Trying to have them track a bunch of stuff they already can't track, bad plan. Monkeying with packets in flight, bad plan. This is not a good idea. Please don't do this.
Okay.
Jinmei.
Jinmei Tatsuya. I guess you are already aware of my comment because you are referring to this. But one other thing is that the terminology of embedding and extract are quite confusing to me. I didn't understand whether it means, for example, a header insertion or not. So whether it's good or bad, I think this draft should be more clear about what it means.
Okay, you mean regarding the terminology we use in the draft?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. And Christian, you have the rest of the meeting.
Good morning. I'm Christian Wittemar. I'm presenting here work I did with Fernando on address usage recommendation. So basically, the motivation there is that hosts have multiple addresses, and that creates issues about how many addresses to configure and how to use the multiple address that are configured. For example, you can have stable addresses and temporary addresses, and we have some discussion about how and when to use them in the address selection APIs, RFC, but these documents only specify what you do for outgoing connection. For incoming connection, the state of the art is to basically do a bind or listen to pretty much every address on the system. You may think that's fine, because I mean we have been doing this bind to 00 for a very long time. But in fact, if you combine the temporary address and the stable address, if you combine issues of addresses that have different scopes and not, doing a bind to every address may have results that you do not expect. For example, suppose that you are opening something like a local file server. And suppose that you do that by default. Then anyone can check whether there is something at the port of your local server from anywhere to see whether you are again on that network. Suppose then that you have temporary addresses and you have this local file server again, okay? And you have done a temporary, and you use your temporary address to go look at a web page somewhere. There's a variety of systems that can notice that you are doing that, and then can find that you have a temporary address. And if someone is ill-intentioned, they can do a call to the port of your file server using that temporary address. Now, that is not a theoretical concern. It's actually happening right now. People configure temporary addresses. They believe that 64-bit who's going to scan that. They open a local server, which in their mind is just local. They don't give the advertisement of that server to anybody. It's not in the DNS or anything. But because the server also listens on the temporary addresses, it becomes discoverable from the outside. And then there is the scope issue. I mean, maybe that server was meant to be temporal, to be local, but you know, in practice, it's pretty hard to bind to a local address because I mean, you have to be able to enumerate the address on the system, etc. So if you bind to 0 instead, to the undefined address, then your local service, which you believe was local, that you only advertise using something like DNSSD or something like that, is in fact reachable from the outside. So these are reasonable issues. Yeah. So, yeah, a bit about actually programming your addresses. I mean, I've tried that a couple of times on different programs I was writing. It's really a pain in the ass. In theory, you can enumerate all the addresses on your system, and you can check the property of the address and say, I bind to this one, I bind another socket to that one. But in practice, people don't do that. Moreover, if you do that, you have to redo that each time the address change, for example, because there's a new temporary address or whatever, and that's a real pain too. Yes, Francis?
Francis Dupont, there are some UDP applications which require to use the address you received request to send response. So these are binding to each address, and I confirm about the things developers could do.
Yes, no, some advanced applications do that. That's true. But it's really advanced programming. It's a pain in the ass, and most developers won't. Okay. So,
Hello. Hello.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Sorry. From an applications perspective, as a user, it is confusing because the behavior is bistable. Some applications appear to say anything, but are only bound to historical addresses at the time they bound. Other applications say anything and will bind to the port-only component and are visible on all addresses, transient and permanent.
Yes.
And at the higher level, you have no knowledge which case applies. So it is complicated.
Thank you. So these are the address selection issues, but they also address configuration issues. Okay. Think of address selection as a filter that takes whatever has been configured and say, out of what has been configured, I'll take this and that. That means that the system management can choose what address it configures, and that will constrain the application. So you have this dynamic there. At the same time, if the system configuration configures addresses that are for different purposes, the application is meant to discover that. So we were looking at that, and there is one particular case which is interesting, which is the case of stable versus temporary addresses. Basically, you have the question of, in some cases, I want to only use stable addresses. Like, typically, I am in an enterprise network, and the IT department has plugged various kind of address-based filtering on 1,000 devices on the network. And if I use a different address than the one that they have configured, it just will not work. An example. Other example is, I am visiting an internet cafe in some kind of a bad place. I really want to use different addresses each time I come because I don't want to be tracked. So in that case, I want to only have the temporary address. And then you have the case of your IT department says, yeah, you have to use a stable address for your local traffic because I want to check that the connection to the local servers come from an address I know about. But it's perfectly fine to use temporary address for the outgoing traffic because the remote servers don't need to know my local topology or whatever. So these are configuration decisions, and we are not really providing guidelines on how to do that and when and how to configure. Okay. And so that's pretty much what I wanted to mention about address usage, address configuration. And I would like to know if there is interest in the working group on basically having some specification there, which could be either something like just an informational RFC, putting up that kind of information and saying, hey, you have to consider that, maybe you need to be smart. Or maybe some kind of server address configuration RFC and says, hey, the equivalent of address selection for servers, can we specify that? Or maybe some recommendation of new APIs or whatever. Okay, there might be some interest.
So, Christian, just a point of order. Do you want to run over in the next presentation for these questions, or what's your priority? Do you want to run through these very quickly because we're on time?
Yeah, we have 5 people at the line.
Yeah, let's run through that, and there might be a bit of.
That, and then but give some time for next presentation.
Yeah, Dave, please.
Dave Taylor, I think it is useful to document the issues. On the alternative slide, you mentioned one of the 3 categories of possibilities, and I would have generalized that one. And so the one that you mentioned was, you could bind individual sockets. I think there's actually 3 categories of stuff that techniques that can work today. One is where the application does the filtering. In other words, you just bind to, the IN6 or any, and then when the packet comes in, you said, oh, is this one of the addresses I wanted to listen to? And so that's sort of application layer filtering. Then you have sort of TCP/IP stack layer filtering, of which having a separate socket is one way to do that. There might be other ways, depending on what APIs and stuff might already exist. And so application does it, stack does it via its normal operation, and then the third category is where you might have a firewall that does it, that says, well, this application can only list on this port, but can't receive global traffic from the following addresses. And so enumerating these are the 3 categories of stuff. I'm saying I think it is useful to have an informational document that points out these issues and to say what are the techniques that are already available, and maybe leaves for future work, or maybe your other points about is there opportunity for some proposed standard or whatever in the future. But at least documenting the issues now and what the possibilities are right now, I think is useful. So thank you.
Michael Richardson. So I was thinking, sitting there, okay, what's alternatives to bind socket? And the thing that struck me, and I'm asking if this is kind of things that you're thinking about, maybe Dave is thinking about. So something different than the : that goes in there, some other magic that says, yes, I want to bind to any link local address, but not any global address, or I want to bind only temporary addresses and not stable addresses. So there would be a different thing than : something else from a reserved space. Is that the kind of thing you're thinking about at this point, or?
That's one possibility.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
So that would really be a API and almost protocol action change.
Yeah.
Not just advice on how to do it, but rather this is a standard.
There are many ways to do that.
I would be very supportive of that because I think it would be very transparent to many applications that can be told, bind to this address, and now we can give them something useful that the stack has provided. And I think that would be a useful thing to do.
Thank you.
Eric Klein. 3 quick things. One, like we already in Android, we sort of reuse the way Linux does anycast addresses to give each application its own per app kind of IPv6 address. So such use cases are interesting, I think. Secondly, I don't know if you've been following any of the stuff in DMM, but they have some work there to try to get these on-demand addresses or prefixes with different qualities. It has some similarity to what you're describing here. And in that document, in that context, we were also discussing the availability of types of addresses, but also types of prefixes. And one of the things that we have implemented through various routing tricks is the ability to bind to a prefix. Basically, if I have this 64, I want to bind to all addresses on this 64. It's also an interesting concept in V6 that you can't have.
Okay.
Okay, so go that microphone, then I'm going to insert Fernando and then chat engine lane.
So can we close the mic there so that some time for the next presentation? Okay, can we close the lines?
I just want to make one comment regarding Eric's stuff. So there's a draft in DMM, but it doesn't address the same access. It talks more about mobility, non-mobility kind of thing. But I'm sure you can think about that, but I don't think it's directly relevant.
Yeah, but I'd be happy to put a reference and maybe some specs if you send it.
Okay, so you go and then we do Fernando quick.
Chris Markle. So it strikes me this isn't really specific to V6 at all. The same problem exists in the board. So, and it's also sort of basic security thing, right? You shouldn't listen to everything if you don't want to get it from everything. If that's not really covered today, maybe putting that kind of thing in a draft is a good plan, but it seems like it's not V6 specific at all.
Well, okay. Actually, the practice of having different address and different scope is much more spread in V6 and in V4.
I think V6 forces that, but there's nothing. I have lots of machines with many V4 addresses.
Let's just take these 3 comments. So Fernando, quickly, please.
Yeah. Yeah, just responding to Michael's comment, one of the things that we were considering was the specification of a socket option that could allow, the application programmer to specify the properties of the addresses that he'd like whether they must be stable, local, or whatever. And a comment on the comment that Chris made, I think that, yeah, while in theory this is, or present in IPv4, with IPv6, you have typically so many addresses of different scopes and types that I think this problem becomes more and more evident. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Fernando. Was it Jin Mei? Or was it Ted? Yeah, go quickly, Ted.
Yeah, so thanks for doing this work. I agree with this important problem. I think that the API suggestion will be good. I think you also need to have, you need to think about documenting what the default behavior should be, because I think just assuming that application developers will make smart decisions here is a bad idea. I think the typical application developer is going to be just completely flummoxed by this whole problem.
Regarding the binding a socket to any address, I have one quick remark. Even if you can perform some filtering on that socket, as long as the packet is delivered to the node and delivered to the transport layer, it may still return something like TCP reset, reset, or ICMP port unreachable error or something. So some of the issues you described may still exist. I think it's relatively easy to address, but maybe you should also note that these things.
Can we go quickly to the? I'm sorry, I don't want to spend much time. You're right. I mean, why don't you send me some text that we can put on the?
We're ready for you, Christian. Temporary IP6 interface.
So temporary addresses. That's another tag on a related problem. So. We were considering whether it might be time to revise, update, or obsolete the current temporary address document. Because there are a couple of issues in that document that are basically 10 years old and things have changed a bit. For example, the document doesn't say anything about whether we should use the same IID on different prefixes. It doesn't actually prevent you from using different IIDs on different prefixes, but if you read the document not very carefully, basically use one IID for a linked local prefix and the same IID for all your other prefixes. And that's a leak of information. The document only mentioned some time-based renewing of addresses, which is not necessarily sufficient, and it doesn't provide a lot of usage guidelines. So basically, we want to have a bigger and a more interesting problem statement that exposes the problem. That's what we try to do in this draft. And basically, you are three big issues there. First, I mean, having the random bit structure in the address, I mean, that's fine in the current specification. We want to disabuse people about putting random MAC address there because it's a bad idea, but it's old. We want to make sure that there is no correlation between different prefixes. And we want to provide the requirement that there is some kind of a timing like event. I mean, the example event I mentioned is, suppose that you are in your browser and your connection will go out with temporary address, that's fine. You clear your cookies. You clear the history because you want to be clear. And then you do a new connection. That new connection will come out with the same temporary address as your previous connection. Just a thought there. How long will it take for the advertisement infrastructure to find out that you're the same guy that had all those cookies before? Okay, so basically, by doing that, you provide linkability across a privacy event. So my take is that if we are serious about that, we should actually flip the temporary address when we crash the cookie and when we have a privacy event. And this tracking of privacy event is, I think, something that we ought to be considering. It's a key part of privacy. So there are many events. I mentioned the browsing history. Of course, I mean, changing your MAC address with MAC address randomization, another one, because if the user does that, it's expressing that it wants to clear up the whole thing, not just a tiny bit of it. Moving to a new network is another one. I mean, clearly you should not keep the IID that you had on one network and carry it to another, but that's not said in the current RFC. You want to make sure that basically you have this change. Okay, we can go on. We propose, if you don't know how to implement that, a way to generate non-stable address is basically include the MAC address and include the time in your hash, and that way you make sure it changes all the time. And next step, next step is ask questions. I mean, do you think that we should open that specification and work on it a bit?
So we are actually out of time, but why don't you do the two people at the mic, and then the rest can happen on the mailing list.
Tim, Sharon, one thing you may want to consider, we've considered it before, you said a different IID per prefix. It might be that for some people you don't want privacy addresses, and for others you do. So per prefix configurability is a useful thing.
Actually, I think you covered this whole topic in your previous presentation. That the fallacy is that that the applications do bind of : on outgoing connections and let the system decide, and so there's no relationship to any of the privacy events. And so it actually feeds into the same API that you're talking about, that now applications on outgoing events need to say what kind of an address I was thinking about, and if this is a privacy browser, they need to say, and here's a new generation ID. So I think you can cover this in one document.
Okay, well, thank you very much. See you in Prague if we manage to get out of the country unharmed.
We need to find the blue.
Yeah, so there's a blue sheet coming up. Thank you. Fantastic technical plenary. Yes, yeah, last night. Yes, I thought that was blue. That was good too. Cool. That's yeah. Yep. Cool. That is fantastic, and yeah, exactly what we want. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Yes. Okay. You good? So, survive, sort of. Yeah. Okay, then we need to add that. Yeah. So what part of it do you want to like?